Is God imaginary? That is the question, and hopefully I can give the answer. So, when somebody claims that God is imaginary, the question to ask them would be, how do you know God is imaginary? Because unless you know everything and you have absolute knowledge, it's impossible to make such a claim as that. Now, you could make an educated guess as to whether God is imaginary or not, like of many other things. So it would be in a person's best interest to critically examine the claim that's being made and then look at if there's any evidence to back up the claim and make an informed, educated, reasonable decision. And, when you really think about it, it's very unreasonable to say that God is imaginary. The best that a person could say is that at this present time, from all of the knowledge that I'm aware of, I don't have a belief in God, and I'm not convinced that there is a God. But I'm open for the possibility that God may exist. And I will continue to look for such evidence to see if he does exist. That would seem the most, reasonable response that somebody could say to a Christian. Now, I would point out, though, that there's many good evidences and reasons why God does exist. And I could just as easily say that the Easter Bunny is imaginary, and I could give good reasons why the Easter Bunny is imaginary. On the other hand, many of the reasons and arguments that people have given that claim that God is imaginary have already been debunked and dealt with at a great length and detail. Unfortunately, the people making those claims have not actually looked into that, I don't believe, to the fullest. And so they're misinformed, or they have this preconceived idea, bias, that shapes their thinking and their responses when they speak to you. So, if somebody asked me if I believed in God, I would tell them yes, and if they asked me why, I would give them good reasons or evidences of why I believe in God. And if they wanted more specifically the God that I believe in, I would tell them the God of the Bible, which I'm a Christian. So some of those reasons or evidences would be God is the best explanation of the origin of the universe. To help explain what that means is, we know that everything has a cause. And we know from mainstream science that the universe began to exist. So that it was not infinite in the past, but had a point at which everything began to exist, if you go back far enough. And I believe that was about 6,000 years ago. So we know from science that the universe began to exist, and it says in the Bible that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. So that would be the totality of the universe and everything in it. So Earth as well, and all of the planets and everything. And we know that God claims to be eternal, outside of time. He's immaterial, spaceless, timeless. So he fits the description of something that would bring the universe and everything into existence, because he's outside of it. And time is not relevant where God resides. So you have this, you could say, disembodied mind, aka also known as God, that brought everything into existence. And that's what I mean when I say God is the best explanation of the origin of the universe. Now, contrast that with the atheist position, in that there was a Big Bang and it just happened out of nothing for apparently no guided reason. It was all unguided, random, which would then follow that we're just a bunch of random chemicals, and everything that we are and everything that we do and everything that we think is basically already been predetermined by a set of chemicals and things that happen to us and in our lives, and everything really becomes meaningless, and there's really no good explanation for why is there good and bad and evil and justice and hope and love. And of course all of these things can kind of be scientifically examined under, a microscope, but it still doesn't answer the question, why? Why is there something rather than nothing? What is the purpose of my life? Is it all just a bunch of chemicals? And if it's all a bunch of chemicals that determine what I think is right or wrong, and if it's all just a social construct, and if it's all just determined by how I grow up and what society that I live in, and if the society that I live in decides that it's wrong to do this and another society decides it's right to do this, how does anyone have any absolute standard of right or wrong? It's all basically relative of what you and I believe. In other words, relativism is basically you make up the rules. You decide what's right or wrong, or if it's not you as an individual, it's a group, or it's a society, or it's a state, or it's a country, or what have you, is what determines what is right, what is wrong. Whereas if you have an absolute standard, if you have a creator of the universe who actually gave us these moral laws and duties, which is another evidence, I would say God is the best explanation of moral duties, of morals and duties in the world, and that would make sense, and it would logically follow and be true if in the beginning, in the first book of Genesis, it said that God created man in his image. We were made in the image of God. If we're made in the image of God, then we share all of those attributes of God. So all of that stuff would follow through with us, and we would have morals. We would be moral creatures. We would be, we would have reason and logic, and things would make sense. If that's not the case, then nothing really makes sense. Only, and I wouldn't really be able to trust whatever I'm saying, even what I'm saying now. It would just be a result of chemicals bouncing around and, and certain stimuli, which doesn't really make any sense. So, there's a lot of good evidences, logical arguments for the existence of God, and it's more reasonable and probable that God does exist than not. When you honestly evaluate the arguments, when you honestly evaluate the evidence, and you compare it. to the opposite conclusion, which is that God does not exist and there's nothing after you die, and that is it. That is a sad state of affair, because that means that there's no ultimate justice. So all the people that were treated unfairly in life, they have no hope of justice. They